Well, it's good to see you. We're not in Westminster Hall, live streaming worship as we are doing these days. And I thought I might say a word about other spaces in the church and remember some of my feelings, and maybe you have feelings about these spaces too. So this is going to be the first in a series of peeks around the building that we can do on the days when we're in here taping our worship service. We're going to do some of these. And I'm standing right now outside the chapel. And some of you who've been around the church a long time will remember that that wall behind me, that paneled wall, used to be what all four walls of this parlor used to be. And when I came 20 years ago, this is where we had some of our first meetings here in the parlor. I remember the first session meeting was here in the parlor. And I would hear people talk about stories they remembered here as we made changes to this space and people shared memories. In fact, about right where I'm standing was where Liz Heller gathered with a women's retreat, had everybody put their little scraps of paper with their sins they were confessing into a bowl, and she placed it on the floor about right where I'm standing and then dramatically lit those pieces of paper on fire, which proceeded to burn through the bottom of the bowl and into the carpet, and the fire alarm went off and everybody fled the building and the fire department came and managed to put the fire out. But that's what happened here in the parlor. That's a memory that some of you probably still have. Right now this space is used in other ways. It's kind of a flow through. Children and families use the space. It's where our gallery starts, and it's a wonderful open kind of circulation area now outside the chapel. But I'd like to show you the chapel. You haven't seen it for a while, and it's where I begin every Sunday morning with our 8:30 service. So I imagine myself here on a Sunday morning. It's the first space I enter when I come in the building, and I'm missing being in here. There's something about this chapel space that really is quite wonderful. It's designed to be something like an English Anglican country church, even though we're an urban Presbyterian church in America. But there's a certain wonderful quality to this space. So the first thing I do when I come in from the Marquette Tower, because the staff members do not park in the garage. We park on the street or over in the ramp. I come in and I come right into this space, usually have my tea and my coat, and I'm immediately enveloped by the memories of the worship services. This is the space we use for worship more than any other, really, because of the number of memorial services and weddings, and of course every Sunday at 8:30. It's highly used, and lots of memories in here. I remember the memorial services and moving times we've had in worship here, all of us together who are in this space. So I come in here and I kind of settle into the space, put my tea down, my coat, and arrange my sermon here, check the sound to see if it's working. There's usually a musician either here or comes in while I'm settling in, and we talk about the service, and I almost always make some arrangements. Rodney Allen Schwartz comes in, makes sure the flowers are right, the candles are right. This is part of our ritual for worship that you don't see, but it means a lot to us to prepare the space for the worship of God. It's an important part of our morning ritual on a Sunday. And then when the service begins, what I like about this space, different from the sanctuary, is it's so intimate. We might have 120, 110, 90, sometimes, depending on the weather, 30 or 40 people in this space. I could hold about 150, and we sometimes get it pretty close to that. But no matter the number, I can see everybody. Everybody can see me. There's a sense of intimacy, which is really valuable and appreciated by the preacher. And I know where you're sitting in here, so I know who's going to be in that last pew on the aisle right up against the end of it. I know who's going to be sitting over here. Oh, and there's a family over there, and I know who's sitting over here. So when I come into this space for worship at the start of the service, it feels like coming home, because I know here's the family gathered. There's always visitors, and they find their spaces, but here's the family gathered for worship in this wonderful space, the Westminster Chapel. We've been worshiping in this space since 1937, and I guess that ministers before me and before our ministerial staff now have had similar sorts of feelings and memories when they came into this space. So there's one thing I want to show you you've probably never seen in this chapel. So I'm going to move the camera over here and just take a shot. It's over by the organ, and you can't really see it from where you are, but I can read it to you. There's a plaque on the wall that you maybe didn't know about. You might want to see when you come in the next time. It says Westminster Chapel organs, plural. The Westminster Chapel was built in 1937. The organ installed at that time was a gift of Franklin and Harriet Crosby in memory of their son Franklin Jr., who died that same year in 1937. The organ came from their home at 2120 Park Avenue in South Minneapolis. So the organ that we enjoyed here from 1937 until we installed this new organ, that organ was the Crosby family organ in their music room. The generosity of Ella Pillsbury Crosby, married to Franklin and Harriet's youngest son, Thomas, of course, members of our church, and members of her family and others in the congregation, made possible the present organ, Opus 86 of the Dobson Organ Company, Lake City, Iowa, in 2008. To God be the glory. So this organ here replaced the Crosby family organ that was played from 1937 to 2007. And then we built this new organ into this space. So those kinds of memories, those kinds of stories are in the woodwork, they're in the stone, they're in the walls and the roof of this room. I'm glad to be able to remind you of Westminster Chapel when you're not able to be here right now. One of my favorite places in the church is an older place. This dates from the 1937 edition. It's the cloister hallway. And one of the things I like about this is when I enter it, I feel like I'm kind of in an old medieval space. The cloisters of an abbey or a convent or a monastery. It reminds me a little bit of the cloisters on the island of Iona, which has these sort of same kind of windows. Now, these windows, until a renovation back in 2010, I think, these windows had colored glass in them, but you couldn't see out, and no one could see in. Now I love coming around the corner and look out, and I see there's Orchestra Hall, there's the IDS Tower, there's Target. It reminds us that we are connected to the city. This was the first time that we actually had clear glass in our spaces. Everything was colored glass, stained glass. You couldn't see out it. And I often pause right here to greet Don Meisel. Dr. Meisel here is portrait, who served in this church for 20 years, 72 to 92. And I often stop here and feel kind of silly about it, but I say, good morning, Don, and greet him. He seems to sort of nod back at me, but it's a transition for me to remember one of my predecessors who walked this same hallway going from the chapel to the sanctuary, walking by these bronze plaques that tell the honor roll of those who served in our congregation, tell the story of the generations in the time of World War I and World War II who stepped up to serve their country from our congregation, and some of them lost their lives, and that's indicated here. I often stop and look at those plaques and read the names, and we still have family members, the next generations, several down the way, of people who served. And this is a significant, meaningful space for me. I love coming in here. A lot of you who are live streaming while we're in Westminster Hall have emailed me or texted or phoned to say, it's really great in Westminster Hall, but you know what we really miss is the sanctuary. And you're not alone. I miss the sanctuary too. This is really wonderful space. I remember the very first time I came into this space. It was December of 1998. It was the first time Beth and I had ever been to Minneapolis. And if you remember, those of you who were here then, the congregation was still in exile, worshiping in the Great Hall, and this room was being finished for Christmas 1998 when the return would happen. And we were here about 10 days before Christmas, and still a construction site, but nearly finished. And I was privileged to come into that upper window there and walk into this room, and I was stunned by it. You know, it's first thing, the impression immediately was I'm standing in a kind of a bowl that really reminds me of what the church is. This is church in the round, and church ought to be in the round, ought to be circular. Our communion tables should be circular tables as far as I'm concerned, because everybody has a place at a table like that. So I was impressed first by the roundness of it, and then of course by the color of the glass. And then I heard the stories of the glass. There's the window, my favorite window is the one I see on a Sunday morning, and you're all looking toward the front, and those of us up here see the window, the original rose window from 1897 that is just geometric colors. It's oranges and greens and pinks, combinations of colors you wouldn't really expect. It was a late 19th century art, and I love it. It allows me to have kind of a kaleidoscope experience of color and movement and dynamic artwork here in the space. I came down, I remember that very first time, came into the pulpit. That's what a minister always does, a preacher always does when they're in a new worshiping space. They get into the pulpit, and I got into the pulpit. I remember thinking, boy, I'm at the bottom of the bowl. And if anybody on this main floor were to drop a marble, it would roll all right down to the pulpit. This is really reformed. It's our tradition. The Word is at the center of worship, and this pulpit and this sanctuary says that so much. The congregation gathers as a circled community around the preached Word. I loved that about this space. Then I was told how many people can actually fit in this space, and I was astonished because when you're preaching, I can see everybody, and I think you all know that because when you're missing, sometimes I send you an email or a text and ask where you were, but I know who sits up in that part of the balcony and over here, and I know who sits over in this area and who's down in front, and when you change your seats, it throws me off, and you've heard me tell you that. But again, it's kind of like a gathering of the family, and some of you insist on sitting in the same space, same place. No matter if we're a full house or not, you're still in that back pew or the side pew. It's interesting how the space has filled up differently now that we're parking inside the building and not coming more from this side, but now coming from this side. I've had to adjust a bit to the movement of people and their different seating patterns. There used to be in this church until the late 1950s assigned seating. You rented your pew. And there's a map down in our archives that show family names by the pews where those families sat. And that was, well, that's 70 years ago when that was happening, 70 and 80 and 100 years ago. And you know what? Some families, the descendants of those families, still sit in the same places. It's just the sort of that kind of generational equity in this space is really wonderful about Westminster. We've got some families that are 3, 4, 5, 6 generations here. It's a depth of commitment to this community that's really wonderful. But I love preaching here because I know everybody can hear. I can see everybody. If this were a Gothic nave, it'd be half a block to the back of the sanctuary to fit in the 12 or 1,300 people that can sit in this space, and I wouldn't have eye contact and wouldn't be able to see as well there. The strange thing about this, and I remember seeing this when I first came in here, the strange thing about the sanctuary is the choir loft. You see how you see it every Sunday when we're able to worship here. It's divided basically into 4 sections, upper right and left and lower right and left, and it's kind of like a galley-like arrangement, and the choir director. It's very hard to direct a choir when they're all sort of up against the wall, and you're not very far from that wall yourself. So Amanda Weber has taken to directing the choir from a much better place, which is down in front in the sanctuary. It allows the choir really to sing to the congregation in a much more open way, and I think that's a good creative change that's happened. The organ, of course, is the key part of this, and I've heard from a lot of you that you really miss the organ while we're in Westminster Hall, and frankly, I do too. Kenny Veen, who's doing a great job on the piano in the hall, has even said, well, I could try the Vito or Toccata on the piano for Easter, and we all kind of said, well, I mean, it was nice of him to try, but the Vita Toccata, of course, is meant to be played here, right below that beautiful Celtic cross. We'll be back into this space at some point. We'll hear the organ play. Maybe it's Easter next year when we hear the Vita Toccata here and we sing the Hallelujah chorus and the lilies are out. And, you know, I just think of the memories in this space, the poinsettias, the greens that hang. And, you know, the other thing about this, I have a really well-developed sense of smell. And when I come into this space, there's a scent to it. And I love that scent. And I've been here 20 years, and I still notice that when I come in. I could come in here blindfolded, and I could tell you where I was standing, because there's a certain scent to this space. And I'm here with all my senses, and grateful to be in this space. Wish you were here with me, and we will be back together at some point. But I wanted to give you just a feel for my own sense of belonging in this space, in the bottom of this wonderful bowl. Okay, so the worship service has concluded, and where do I go after that benediction that I love to offer every Sunday? I walk down and come over to what we call the preacher's door. And I often, when I'm here, I just love to take this look down the hallway, all the way down from actually Nicollet Mall to Marquette to the nursery. We used to not be able to see down there, and I love this sense of connectedness, the sight line here from the sanctuary to the children. And so I come over here, you know the drill. I stand at the door, and this is one of the things I really miss with our being apart like this. I don't get a chance to greet you, to say hello. It's often, 5 seconds. Sometimes it's a minute or two. And if someone really has something to talk to me about, often then I'll step aside and we'll talk. I have Kathy Miller-Peitzman and Lloyd Peitzman, we call them my shadows. They're right here, and if I see someone come through, I greet them, and I think they're visiting for the first time. When they walk by me, they don't see this, but I give the nod to Kathy and to Lloyd, and they're immediately on them, and greeting them and welcoming them, and if possible, getting their names and contact information. These are behind-the-scene things you may not know about, but the shadows are an important part of our evangelism, of our welcoming new people. The church is really just a network of relationships. It's relationships that the clergy, the other staff members, you and other lay people in the church have. It's a network of relationships. That's really what the church is. We call it the body of Christ. Lots of parts. We're all connected. This is one of the places where the connective tissue happens. When the pastors, as they stand at the door, greet people coming in, going out. Usually it's going out. We don't stand down here coming in, but occasionally I do work the crowd. If I have a little bit of time before a service, I'll get out and greet people before the service, which I love to do as well, because this is all about our relationships, which is why this staying apart thing is really hard for me, for the other pastors and our whole staff team, and why it's so important to keep connected with one another by telephone or email or text, or it's why we're doing the live stream and teaching and doing all we can to stay connected, to keep that network vital and alive, because the church really is us together.